Welcome to Lesson 5, Making the Best Selections. This lesson is pretty intense and it has a lot of stuff in it. And what I'm going to do in this little short snippet here is just go over some of the selection techniques, probably not using everything that's in this lesson and maybe a little bit more mixed up, but just to give you an idea of what you might be reading about and the steps you may be taking when you follow this lesson. I'm going to start out by, you'll notice I'm in Bridge, and I'm going to start out by opening up an image called lesson05, and it's a picture of a car, just to show you some different things. Now, a lot of people already understand that you have to select it to affect it, and when I click and drag within this area, you'll notice that, of course, if I choose image, adjustment, curves, and I start making changes, that it is affecting that image. Now, what's kind of nasty about this is that that image is permanently changed in there. You'll see that the background is selected and that change is being made. Whereas, if you are making changes, it's sometimes better to use the Layers panel and do something like this. Made my selection. I choose that I want a new fill or adjustment layer, and in this case, I'll choose Curves. Comes up. I'm going to change my options by holding down in the panel menu, and I'm just going to choose Curves Display Options and tell it, I'm feeling like I want to read this like ink. And the reason I'm doing that, press OK, is because I want to be able to play with this curve in a way that makes sense to me. Like, in other words, this is the dark area of my image, and this is the light area of my image. And if I simply want it lighter, I click and drag, and look at that. And the other great thing about this, it's giving me an output, so I know when I'm about a 30% or 20% or wherever I am, because I do have this set on ink instead of the original, which is light option. Now, the other benefit to this is, notice that in my Layers panel, that I can turn this off or on. So I've done a non-destructive change using my selection tools. Now, other things that I can do, some really helpful things that I like. First of all, if I choose the elliptical marquee tool, I can hold down my Alt and my Shift key as long as nothing else is selected. And that allows me to click and drag from the center. And you'll notice that now I'm making a selection of that tire. And now with that selected, let me click on the background, Control J. Now, Control J on the Windows system or Command J on the Mac OS is simply, hey, take whatever I have selected and jump it to a new layer. And now I have this, and you can't tell the difference just yet, can you? Well, I'm going to take this particular layer, and I'm going to run a filter on that, maybe a blur, motion blur, just make it look like it's zooming a little bit. And you'll notice that, of course, it's not actually happening because I did it on a separate selection or a separate layer, but I can turn this on and maybe turn the opacity down a little bit to give me that look. But again, if you want to do something that's a major modification and you're not sure you want to affect the original, select the component that you want to change and Control or Command J it, and it lifts just that part up to a new selection. Now, other things that I can do in here, I'm going to go ahead and move on into some other imagery, and perhaps I want to go ahead and use the Magic Wand tool. I'm going to close up this image. Don't save it. Go back into Bridge. Now I can also click on the Launch Bridge icon up in the application bar. And in this case, I'll use the O2 image and take my Magic Wand, which is now a hidden tool. And this started in the last version. It's hidden underneath the Quick Selection tool. But notice that if I click on the blue sky, depending upon where I click, I might not get the entire sky. And this is because there's a tolerance set up here, a default of 32, which basically means when you click on a color, can you take 32 shades of that color? If you want it to take more, increase that amount. Or you can simply click on the color, and if it does miss a color, like here, I'll click up here in the darker area. If I miss an area, I can hold down the Shift key and I can add to that selection. Sometimes it's easier to select an item's background rather than the item itself because this has so many multiple colors in it. But now I could choose Select Inverse, and now the kite is actually selected. And maybe I want to do something simple like take my Move tool, hold down my Alt key, and clone it. So we got lots of kites. But again, what I've done is I've simply used the magic wand to make my selection, and then I inverted it. Moving on. Don't want to save that. I'm going to go back into Bridge. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and open up 03 image and use the cool handy dandy quick selection tool, and you'll notice I can just kind of paint over what I want selected. Another method I can use. Notice how quick it goes into here, making these selections. If it goes too far, I can hold down my Alt key and delete from it. Or if I want to add, I don't have to do anything as a default. Makes it really easy. What you can also do, if I go through, and I'll do this with my magic wand just so you can see the difference. I'm going to press Control D to deselect. Select the building. Okay, now this didn't do such a great job. And I'm going to hold down the Shift key to add to my selection. Let's say I want to quickly add components that were missed when I used the magic wand. I can also take the lasso tool and understand that no matter what selection tool you use, when you hold the Shift key down, you are always adding to the selection. So if I come over here and I just kind of encompass this whole area, say I want to add that as a selection, you'll see it grabs all of that and adds it. Now I'm going to accidentally go in here. Whoa. I did want this selected. What I can do by doing this, actually don't want that part of the selection. I can hold down my Alt key and come up here and take that out of my selection. And notice I'm drawing the entire area. I'm not just drawing a line up the edge so that I can surround it. So by using your Shift and Alt or Option key, if you're in the Mac OS, you can add or delete to your selection. Now that was thrilling. Let's move on. I'm going to choose Bridge again, and maybe we want to take this happy duck here. I'm going to open up both of these images, and he really feels that he's a penguin. I'm going to do a really quick rough selection with this, and the reason I'm doing this, even though I could do a much better one with the quick selection tool or virtually any tool, I'm doing this on purpose because I want you to see how you can take advantage of masking for selections. If I press Q, it turns on the quick selection tool or the quick mask tool. And when I come in here, I can use my brush. Now I'm going to press, again, I'm going to give you a little keyboard shortcut here. If you look at the P key on your keyboard, you've got brackets off to the right. If you press the right bracket, your brush size will become larger. Left bracket, your brush size will be smaller. But the benefit to this is that I can paint my mask on, and wherever I'm painting the mask, it is not going to be selected. And how I can test this is by pressing Q, and that exits me out of the quick mask mode. Now, another thing you can do, I was just telling you that the right bracket makes your brush size larger. If you hold down the Shift right bracket, it makes your brush size harder. So now I've got a harder edge in here, and of course Shift left bracket would make it softer. So I'm going to make it a little bit smaller in here to get in these areas. I'm not making a perfect selection in any way, shape, or form, but I think you can get an idea of how this works. Now, if you do not have black and white as your default, you may get a gray color when you do this. So if you want to make sure that you have black and white, press D, and that will return you to the black and white colors. Now, if I accidentally go into the duck, I can, of course, press X. You'll notice that switches my black and white, and when I paint with white, I open this area back up. So you can just simply press X, 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 and paint away until you get what you want. Now, I've got my happy duck. I press Q. I guess we can't tell whether he's happy or not because is he smiling? Who knows? I am going to now choose to float my windows, or actually I'll do this 2 up so that you can see both the windows. I'm going to tuck my layers palette away, take my move tool, and just take this selection over. Voila! And now we got the happy duck going across the image with a horrible selection, but that's okay because we can work on that later. In fact, let me go back to this image just to show you something. If you want to be really careful with your selections, I have an active selection right now. If I go to my layers palette and I have this selected, now right now it's a background layer, so I can't implement any layer features. But if I hold down my Alt key and double click on this, turns into a layer, and then with an active selection, I can add a layer mask. And when I do that, it puts a mask on the side that I can shift-click to turn off or on. But the real benefit to this is I can continue editing this really bad selection. So if I want to add or delete from the selection, I've got the ability to do that without actually destroying that image. Okay, so moving on, one more type of selection tool that I want to cover, and that is probably the best one out there. That's the pen tool. And so I'm going to go ahead and maybe I'll open up one of these apples here. And if you use the pen tool, there are some pen exercises in this lesson file that are really helpful. I'm just going to show how you can use it to apply a change to an image. And to do that, I'm going to hold down on my spacebar and control key and just zoom into this particular apple. And using my pen tool, first of all, you'll notice that when I am using my pen tool, I am happily following the path of my object. Now, before you do this, you of course want to make sure that you have the path selection turned on up in your options bar. Otherwise, you will be creating a shape. You'll probably have to delete it and start again. So I'm not doing this. This directional line is following the shape that I'm creating. And if you just relax and you let the directional line follow, you can usually create a pretty accurate path. It's the people who fight the pen tool that usually get the really bad paths. Now, when I close that, you'll see I got a little odd stuff going on here. So I'm going to do a Control Z. And now when I hold down my Alt key, now it maintains that corner point. Now, doing this, I can add a new fill or an adjustment layer for hue, saturation, and maybe I want to change the color of this. I can just choose, hey, change the hue and choose a color that I want. Maybe desaturate a little bit. But the real benefit to this is that I created this path for the selection with my pen tool. I can turn it off or on, or if I go back to my direct selection tool, I can continue to edit this path. So it gives you a really precise change or selection. So that's how you can easily edit with a path. That's it. So have fun with your selections, and don't forget you have to select it to affect it.